It's the amazing Rico Brogna podcast with your host, Evan Roberts.
Welcome in to another brand new edition of a podcast that has a name, and that name is Rico Brogna. How we all doing? Hoff and I are very excited because in a couple of days, we're getting on a plane and we're going down to spring training 2025. And if you are going to be in Florida, stop by and say hello. We'll be doing a live podcast on Saturday from Das, which is this beautiful beer garden. If you're watching on YouTube, we have this huge graphic we just popped up. But if you're watching on YouTube, if you're not, if you're listening to our podcast, I'll read what our big promo picture says. It's a picture of me. I look very upset or excited. There's a baseball that's cracking a window, and there's Mr. Met. And it says, special live from spring training Rico Brogna podcast, March 8th, 4:45 p.m. until about 6 o'clock at Das Beer Garden, 1203 Town Center Drive, Jupiter, Florida. So come on out, hang out. We'll do a live podcast and talk some Mets baseball. We have an interesting element to today's Rico. We are going to do the Rico 10. There are 10 Mets stories from the last couple of days, because the last Rico we did was Sunday. So it's been a couple of days. There are 10 related Mets stories. I sort of ranked them 10 through 1, and we're going to go through every one of those stories over the course of this podcast. Now, before we get started, I do want to remind you that there's a little link on our YouTube page or where you downloaded our podcast. It's a chance to fill out a survey. And what's fun about filling out that survey is not only do you get to have your opinion heard, which is nice, but you will get 50% off the brand new Rico t-shirt, a shirt that I finally got in my hands recently. I wore it during one of the Evan and Tiki programs, and Hoffman is wearing one right now. It's the Rico Blue Edition. You like it, Hoff?
It's freaking awesome. I've got a lot of compliments already on it. And the established 2022 is like a nice chef's kiss to it, I feel.
I agree. I remember at first when we were designing these shirts, it just said 22, and I got bothered. I said, Hoff, he wore 26. And Hoff's like, no, we're talking about when it was established. I'm like, oh, okay. I was confused because Rico actually wore 26. But if you fill out that survey, the link is in the description of this podcast or on the YouTube channel. Very cool, 50% off the Rico t-shirt. So check that out. So now that we got all the business out of the way, our live Rico from spring training, the survey and the t-shirt, let us begin the Rico 10. Because over the last 72 hours since we last did a Rico Brogna, episode 438, a lot has happened. So let us begin with story number 10. And story number 10 is the fact that Kodai Senga went out there and threw a spring training game. And to me, because that game was on TV, it was Monday night, which I like. I like nighttime spring training games because it makes me feel like it's the regular season. You know, unfortunately, when you're a few days in to spring training, and we are more than that now, we are a few weeks into spring training, the monotony of games that don't count become, dare I say, just rough. You know what I mean? Because we're starting to thrive or kind of really have this urge to watch real baseball, to watch games that matter. That first spring training game is exciting because it's baseball. It's new. It's February, and now it feels warm outside. But once you get a few weeks in, the monotony becomes tough. So I like the nighttime game because it makes you just for a slight second actually get confused enough into thinking that this is a real game, that it's the regular season. So I enjoyed that on Monday, but what I really enjoyed was watching Kodai Senga, A, pitch, B, not leave a game early due to injury, not look like he got shot when there's a pop-up to first base like we saw in that Atlanta game during the regular season last year, but look absolutely filthy. Kodai Senga, and I don't want to get nuts about that because it is spring training, but he looked like the guy from 2023. And it's brief. It's a spring training game. He came back out for his second inning, which was nice to see because Mendy sort of gave us a mixed message on that. At first, it was he'll pitch an inning and then he'll go to the backfields and pitch a second inning. Then he goes out and pitches 2 clean innings, 2 very good innings. And when Senga was asked after the game about it, hey, what changed? His answer was nothing changed. I was always pitching 2 innings. So the whole kind of description of their plan for Senga was weird, but he looked great. And he even talked about a new pitch that he was developing. So he's working on things. And more importantly, with Kodai Senga, he is healthy. Here's the reality of Kodai Senga. And what I think we need to do is take the NLCS and throw it out of our head. We got to take game 1 against the Dodgers, which was a dud, and eliminate it. Because, yes, he was bad. And, yes, he put the Mets behind the 8 ball. And, yes, that game was over before it started. And Kodai Senga was not good. That is one start in a season, in a year, in which it was basically a lost year. And you could argue he shouldn't have even been pitching game 1 of the NLDS and eventually game 1 of the NLCS. So I think you got to put that game out the window and remind yourself that when Kodai Senga pitches, he's damn good. That's what the story in 2023 was. And when you look at this rotation, starting a brand new year, and there are a lot of questions in it, we all understand what they are, having Senga be the dominant guy he was in 2023, that would be monstrous. And so the good news is he came out of the start healthy. The good news is he was already able to throw 2 innings, which was nice to see. And obviously he gave you a glimpse of brilliance by looking like the 2023 Kodai Senga. If the Mets can get 2023 Kodai Senga, we're in damn good shape. So that is story number 10 on the Rico 10. Let's get to story number 9. When Kodai Senga came out of the game after 2 scoreless innings, David Peterson came into the game. And David Peterson is another guy that you look at and you wonder, okay, what is he going to be in 2025? In 2024, we didn't have high expectations for David Peterson, but he comes off the hip surgery. He re-enters the Met rotation. And not only does a brilliant job as one of the more dependable starting pitchers that the Mets had, circumstance led the guy to having to get big outs in the bullpen. And we certainly saw that in game 3 against the Milwaukee Brewers, where after Alonso hits that home run and after the Mets get the insurance run, they still needed David Peterson to get the last 3 outs, and he did. In his first spring training performance, he goes out there, he throws 3 scoreless innings, he throws 37 pitches, so pretty efficient over 3. He strikes out 5, gives up nothing. 1 measly base hit. So very, very encouraging that in his first spring training start, we got to see brilliance from David Peterson. We didn't from Jose Butto, but I kind of look at Jose Butto and say, you know what? It's spring training. He's going to be on this team. He's going to be in the bullpen. Yes, he kind of got eliminated from the circle of trust towards the end of last season, but I don't want to get nuts, good or bad, about spring training results. So the only reason I'm happy about Peterson and I'm happy about Senga was it was their first. It was their first spring training performance. They both came out of this thing healthy, at least as of now, knock on wood. They both look great, and both of those guys are going to be real key factors to this team having success in 2025 and this rotation at least trying to match, if not surpass, what happened a year ago. So story number 9 on the Rico 10, David Peterson making a very good spring training debut. Story number 8 gives me a headache. I got to be honest with you. I have a headache, and I debated whether to bring this story up or not because I don't think it is a story. I don't think it's a thing. And that is the fact that New York Met fans are mad at Andy Martino for saying that Juan Soto misses being a New York Yankee. So I want full disclosure on this about Martino and that report or his opinion or whatever the hell it is. I'm a big fan of when something happens, when there's a story, when there's something said, to look deeper on it, to hear what was said. For the life of me, Hoff, and maybe you could help me out on this, I could not find the baseball night in New York clip of Andy Martino making the comment. The only thing I was able to find was Twitter reacting to it and a graphic from Baseball Night in New York in which Andy's talking about the things he learned from being in spring training, and I'm sure that's what he learned. and he apparently said Juan Soto is fitting in well with his teammates, but in New York with the Yankees, it was a special year and he misses them or something of that nature. And that's my point. Like, I say something of that nature because I couldn't find where he said it to hear the tone, to hear if he was reporting it or if it was just an observation or where he got that observation from. And so I feel very incomplete about the Juan Soto, Andy Martino story, though I know it pissed a lot of Met fans off, which is why here on the Rico Brogna, I did want to at least address it.
Yeah, I do know Sal was sitting next to him when he did say it, so the quote is real. I tried to look for it myself. I couldn't find it. It sounds like he was at camp, and it was kind of like, what did he learn? And that's what he learned. I don't know who he spoke to, how he came about it, but that's what came about. And I got to be honest with you, I don't care. I don't care. And whether it's true or not, I still don't care. This is not like a Carlos Beltran thing where it's like, hey, by the way, we found out that Carlos Beltran went back to the Yankees to go try to get take less money to go to the Yankees. That's where he wants to go, because he never went back to the Yankees to try to find more money. He wanted to come here.
Well, I agree with you. I don't care. It's not the Carlos Beltran story, but it doesn't sound like it's reporting. It sounds like he's giving an opinion based on, I don't know what. I don't know if it's talking to people around Juan Soto. I don't know. And so that's the only follow-up I'd have for anyone who cares about it. Because I'm with you. I don't actually care about it. I think Juan Soto likes being a Met. I think you saw that clip on Monday night where him and his teammates are all, God knows what they were doing, but they seem to all enjoy each other. So I'm not concerned about it. I'm just more, I guess I'd say, confused about it because I don't think it's a report. A report is, hey, sources are telling me Juan Soto misses the Yankees. Instead, it sounds like, I think he misses the Yankees. So I don't know if that's reporting. And by the way, like, I know this is unpopular with some Met fans. I don't think Andy Martino's a bad reporter. Okay, so I actually think he's a decent reporter. But this doesn't sound like reporting. This sounds like, I don't know. But maybe you should ask Sal since he was sitting right next to him.
There was a report, though, throughout this entire, off season, and once Soto signed, that Aaron Judge couldn't contact him because he didn't have his phone number.
Right.
So let's be serious. The facts are Juan Soto never spoke to any of his former teammates. So how much did he really miss him?
Yeah, it feels, I don't want to say it feels like a fake report because it's not a report. It just feels like there's nothing really to back it up. But if that's his opinion, it's his opinion. Luckily, I don't care. I think I'll only care, if we're sitting here in July and there's real reporting. Again, not saying Andy's not a real reporter. I'm just saying I don't think this was a report. I mean, unless I'm interpreting it completely wrong. That's why I'd love to see a video of it just to see how it was presented. And I looked for it. I truly tried to find a video so I could know, and I couldn't find it. It's almost like it's being buried. Why? Why would SNY bury it? When they put it out there, you get a lot of clicks or something.
Well, because he's getting killed for it. That's why. I mean, and maybe that's what. Because I thought he tweeted it out too, and had like a subtweet or something after it. Like
what he tweeted out was, here's what he tweeted out. So the video of Soto and his teammates from that Monday night game, the same game where Senga pitched and Peterson pitched, it looks like it's a bunch of Mets, and Soto's in the middle of it, and his arms are around. And they're all just having a great time. They're playing some kind of game. Maybe it's rock, paper, scissors. Soto's laughing. Everybody's happy. So there's a tweet with that video in which SNY Met says, caption whatever is going on here with Soto, Marte, Alvarez, Siri, Alex Ramirez, and Luis De Los Santos with a crying, laughing emoji. So Martino retweeted it and said, this is exactly what I saw in Port St. Lucie last week. Juan Soto, fun-loving young player, fitting in nicely with new group after a year with his previous team that was very special to him. End of conversation. So I don't know I still don't know what any of this means. And the only reason I brought this up on the Rico 10 is I respect my fellow Met fan, and I know that there are Met fans out there that care about this. So yes. I wanted to at least address it, and then we can move on to actual things. Is that fair?
Yeah,
did we address it enough?
That is very fair because that's true. A lot of people wanted to know your opinion about this stuff. So
my opinion is I don't give a rat's ass. And my opinion is it doesn't feel like Andy Martino was reporting anything. In fact, I don't know if he'll admit this. Again, surmising, and this will be the last thing I say about this before we get to real stuff. I bet you, I don't want to say I bet you. You know what? I bet you he regrets saying it because I get the sense it was a throwaway line of Juan's fitting in, he's doing great, blah, blah, blah. But that year with the Yankees was really special, and it may have gotten overblown into something bigger than it actually was. So I don't want to say I'm defending him. I'm just saying I don't care enough about this, and I also don't think it's an issue. So there you go. We addressed it. Let's move on. Let's move on to Rico issue number 7. And some may argue this should be number 1. Jose Quintana signs with the Milwaukee Brewers. So when Quintana signed with the Brewers, a couple of thoughts went through my head, and this happened early on during the Evan and Tiki program, so I was on the air. Thought number 1 was, okay, we can no longer talk about this as Met fans. We can no longer have that safety net of, hey, Manaya's not coming back as soon as we think, or Montas is going to be out longer than we think, or maybe there's another injury to the pitching rotation that we're not aware of yet. Hey, just go sign Jose Quintana. That's gone. Because when he signs with the Milwaukee Brewers, he's no longer sitting there for you. Kyle Gibson is sitting there for you, but does anybody truly want him? So the first reaction was, all right, well, that's gone. The second reaction was, how much did he get? And I admit this to you, and I think I said this on the Rico. I certainly said this on WFAN, and I have no problem admitting when I have to take an L. And I am taking a massive L on the amount of money that Jose Quintana actually got. Because I thought coming off a year in which his overall numbers were decent, he made 30 starts. Granted, his numbers for us Met fans know the deal. He sucked for the first part of the year. We didn't want him on the team anymore. We talked about taking him out of the rotation. But he had a great September. And I don't want to dismiss that. That matters, especially if you're asking us or anybody, would you rather have a great close or a great beginning? Would you rather be, this is for some of the OGs out there, Derek Bell or Jose Quintana? You'd say Jose Quintana. Derek Bell had an April in which nobody could get him out. And then in October, nobody could find him. So I appreciate what Quintana did. He was important down the stretch of the season, one of the big reasons why they made the playoffs. But let's not get it twisted. He didn't have a great year. He had a great close to the year. But his overall numbers were fine. 3.70 ERA. He made 30 starts. I could have sworn he was going to get at least $12 million a year. Now, am I that wrong and idiotic? Or did I misread the market? Or did the market change? Or did Quintana get desperate? But he ended up signing for $4.5 million a year. So when he first signed with Milwaukee on Monday, my reaction was, how much did he get? Because to me, a big reason why the Mets didn't sign Quintana, didn't go back to him, was the tax. Now, you could argue it's more than that, Evan. He would need to be guaranteed a rotation spot. Can you really do that? Especially once they get healthy, especially with Tidwell and Sproat on the way up. Is this similar to the Iglesias situation, which, trust me, we will address later, in that they don't want to block a young player? And I'm not saying that isn't a factor. It is, but I thought money was the biggest factor. I thought that having to pay a 110% tax rate on Jose Quintana was going to be the biggest reason why they didn't bring him back. When you pay a guy $4.5 million, though, it can't be that, because even with the tax, he was going to make $10 million, which is still below what I thought he was going to get. So when I see the number, and we talk about this right now, open and honest, do I trust Jose Quintana more than I trust Griffin Canning? And that's the guy we should compare him to, because Griffin Canning's also making $4.5 million a year. Forget the fact that Frankie Montas is making $17.5 million, or Sean Manaea is making $25 million, or Clay Holmes is even making, who hasn't done anything as a starting pitcher, is making more money. I think the guy to look at is Canning. And I'll ask this of David Stearns. I hope to get him on the podcast. It may just be a conversation down in Port St. Lucie, Florida, but I'm going to ask him on the record so we can all know. Do you just like Griffin Canning better than Jose Quintana? Not that we're going to get a real answer. Probably has to be off the record then, so I get a real answer. But Canning is 28. He's younger. He's got good stuff. He had a worse year than Jose Quintana, but do the Mets look at Quintana at 36 years old and say, we just don't think he's that good? Is that the answer? Because again, I assumed it was the money. I assumed it was, hey, we don't want to pay potentially $25 million a year for Quintana after tax. And that's what it would have been if you're paying him $12 or $13 million a year. Or is it they don't like him? They never liked him. This administration didn't bring him in. Remember, Billy Epler did, the same guy who now works for the Brewers, who signed Jose Quintana. So I'm leaning towards thinking that's what happened here. But yeah, if you ask me, would you rather spend $4.5 million on Quintana or $4.5 million on Griffin Canning? I mean, my answer is Quintana. But here's the beautiful part about this season. Heat check time for David Stearns. My tone, not my words, but my tone is, I'm going to give you the benefit of the doubt because you've earned it. Because the Mets last year won 89 games. You hit with a lot of the moves you made. Not all, but a lot of the moves you made. So when you make pitching decisions like, hey, Griffin Canning, $4.5 million, Jose Quintana, $4.5 million, I know the clocks don't match. But again, maybe they prefer Griffin Canning over Jose Quintana. I don't know. I'm going to give you the benefit of the doubt that this pitching lab is going to do wonders with Griffin Canning. And that you see a guy who's 36 years old in Quintana. You saw his close to the year, but you're like, not that good. Soft-tossing lefty in 2025. So if you ask me, would I prefer Quintana, even at his age, at the same salary as Canning? Of course I would. But let's see what this lab can do. And again, I do want to address this because I don't want people thinking, Evan, you can't just say Quintana versus Canning making the same amount of money when Canning was signed months ago and Quintana had to wait till March. I totally get that the market changed. But that's also a reason why, if you're David Stearns, you can wait on adding a starting pitcher. You can play the market. They did that last year with J.D. Martinez. They did that beautifully, where they didn't add a DH. I'm sitting here on the Rico screaming every day with Hoff, added DH, give me a bat, give me a stick, begging for it. And I think eventually we gave up and just assumed it wasn't going to happen. And then late, because the price came down enough, they got J.D. Martinez. So you are allowed to wait on adding an arm. And if they like Quintana more than I think they like Quintana, they could have waited and that whole thing could have worked out. But it didn't, and Jose Quintana is now a member of the Milwaukee Brewers. Your thoughts on that, Hoff? Are you pissed off about this whole thing and the way it unfolded with Quintana?
Do I think the Mets needed another actual starter that we could rely upon? Sure. But again, like the way that Sproat, the way that Tidwell were pitching, I really want to see them sooner than later. Again, I don't know if that's going to happen anytime soon. I mean, we may not see them Sproat we should see hopefully sometime this season. Tidwell we might not see till next season. And so if there's someone that's going to come in and block it and then unfortunately not be good and then cause someone like a young prospect to come up, then yeah, I'm fine with what they did and we don't have to deal with it. Quintana, though, I think last year was really freaking good in September, and I would have liked to see him come back. So and I'm torn, but I'm okay as long as the prospects come up.
I do not believe that Jose Quintana, Griffin Canning, Paul Blackburn, unless they're pitching lights out, should block Sproat or Tidwell if and when they are ready. So if Griffin Canning is pitching to a 4 ERA, which would be a success compared to last year, and he is a serviceable back of the rotation arm. Same with Tyler McGill, who was throwing about 98, 99 the other day. Same with Paul Blackburn. When Sproat is ready, he's up here. That's the way I view the situation. When he's ready, you will make room for him to be up here. That's the way I view it. All right, let's get to Rico's story number 6, and that's the fact that maybe we got to keep a real eye on Max Kranick, because Max Kranick, who is from Scranton, Pennsylvania, who I think grew up as a Met fan. I think that's the story with him. Max Kranick, who has some major league experience from about 4 years ago with the Pittsburgh Pirates. And last year he was in single A briefly, he was in double A briefly, and at triple A for most of the year, pitching out of the bullpen. That's how they used him. They pitched him out of the bullpen, even though he does have experience as a starting pitcher. And he put up marginal numbers. down at AAA Syracuse. But you look at his stuff. Forget the results. The stuff in the early going. The velocity, the spin rate. Max Kranick has a legitimate shot to make this team and to be that surprise bullpen arm that enters the circle of trust this season. We didn't see Reed Garrett coming, and I know to some Met fans he had a crappy year, but he did have a very good kind of stretch early in the season when he entered the circle of trust. Could Max Kranick, who's still relatively young, he's 27 years old, and he's popping right now, can Max Kranick be the guy who in spring training makes enough of an impact to make this roster? And here's why I slightly believe that we have evidence based on a move the Mets made that they do believe in Max Kranick, because that's story number 5 on the Rico 10. And that is the fact that the Mets have requested waivers on Sean Reed Foley. So Sean Reed Foley, who pitched reasonably well last year until he had an injury and then he had a setback. Sean Reed Foley is one of those guys who we figured had an inside track to making the roster because he doesn't have any options left. And so there's always an advantage when you don't have options. And if you're not making the team, you got to go through waivers, and there's a great chance you're going to be picked up. There are a few guys like that. Danny Young is one of the guys like that. It's really just those two, to be honest with you, in terms of borderline guys who could very well make the team because they don't have options left. Max Kranick has options. We just talked about him. They could send him down. Justin Hagenman has options. They could send him down. Tyler McGill has options. They could send him down. Sean Reed Foley and Danny Young are two of the guys that don't. So coming into spring training, we talked about this. I thought Reed Foley had an edge. But I think the Mets they already know he's not making the team. Now, I don't know if it's purely health-related or if it's they are high on enough young arms. Huascar Brazoban has options, but he's looked good in spring training. I think that the Mets are saying to themselves, he's not making the team, so let's request waivers on him now. He's off the 40-man. Let's see if no one picks him up. We bring him back with the possibility, if he accepts it, of going to AAA. And that is the dream scenario. Dream scenario is not the right word. A dream scenario is, winning the World Series. I wouldn't say dreams. That's the ideal scenario with an arm like Sean Reed Foley, where you keep him around because you're probably going to need to use him at some point. But you're not married to him making the team. And clearly he's not. So we'll see what happens with Reed Foley over the next few days. But I think Kranick, I think the way Brazoban is pitched, I think even bringing in Jose Urena, who either makes the team as a depth rotation piece or an arm out of the bullpen, because he can do both. I think Tyler McGill potentially being on this. I think there's a lot of reasons why David Stearns already knows here early March, Sean Reed Foley ain't making the team. And he's out of options. So let's try to sneak him through now. So that's story number 5. Let's get to story number 4 here on the Rico 10. And that is something that I'm not yet worried about, but Brandon Nimmo already has a knee issue. Now, I listened to what Brandon had to say the other day and Carlos Mendoza. And what Brandon basically said was, I started earlier in spring training a game. Remember last year, he didn't play till like the middle of March. And the reason was coming off that foot issue, I knew something like this could happen. So let's get it out of the way. If I come back and play, which he did, and I have any kind of physical issue, let's have this be addressed on March 4th, March 5th, March 6th, as opposed to closer to opening day. So my concern level on this specific injury is not very high yet, but where I'm at with Brandon Nimmo is, and I hope I'm wrong about this, there are predictions that you'll be positive about. There are predictions you'll be negative about. I'm not going to tell you Brandon Nimmo is going to miss the whole season or anything like that, or he's going to miss half the season. I just don't expect Brandon Nimmo for a 4th consecutive year to play 150 games. I'm kind of bracing for the fact that Nimmo may need to be a guy who you sit once a week. I'm just being realistic about it, because in the early part of Brandon Nimmo's career, he never played every day. He always had injuries. In fact, that was sort of something he had to live with. He was known as a guy that didn't stay healthy, and he never really did, for the most part. And then in 2022, the best season he's had, he played 151 games. And then in 2023, in a bad year for the team, he played 152 games. And then this past year, despite dealing with the plantar fasciitis and dealing with the fact that he had a terrible second half, he goes out and he plays 151 games. I just don't expect that. And so where I'm at on this knee issue is not, I think he's starting the year on the IL or he's done or anything crazy. I just think when you look at the foot issue he had last year, the knee issue he has now, the fact that he's getting older, he's going to be 32 on opening day. He's not old, but he's getting older. I'm starting to think Nimmo is not playing the 150 games he has the last 3 years. And I think the Mets are equipped to deal with it. Like, I think they have the depth, and I'll lay out a few scenarios on what they can do. We already got a little bit of a preview it the other day with Jeff McNeil playing left field. We forget sometimes. Oh, yeah, that's right. Jeff McNeil's really versatile. The beauty of McNeil playing left field, whether it's because Nimmo isn't playing or it's because you move Nimmo to center field to get more offense, is you've got 2 guys right now, and I think 3 down the road, 4 even further down the road, who are absolute potential options at second base. Brett Beatty, who has had a great spring training so far. Luis Angel Acuna. Ronnie Mauricio, not now, that's later down the road. And then maybe even later down the road, Jet Williams. So you've got the ability to move McNeil to the outfield if need be, if Brandon Nimmo has to miss any time, and I hope he doesn't, or just there's a day a week or 2 days a week where you're sitting him because you want to keep him healthy for a full season, in which that can create opportunities for those other guys I mentioned. Are you concerned about Brandon Nimmo? I guess this is Pete's opportunity to just bash Brandon Nimmo. Go ahead.
Well, okay. I'm not going to bash him, but yes, I am concerned because a question I asked you, I think a couple podcasts ago, was what type of hitter is Brandon Nimmo these days? What are we trying to expect out of him? Are we looking for pop? Are we looking for average? Are we looking for on base? Are we looking for speed? Like what type of player is Brandon Nimmo? So a lot of people have penciled him in as, the 4th batter, the 5th batter in this lineup. And there is concern that I just don't know if he's going to give what we want him to give offensively and defensively too. Like, here's the thing is, you could spell him. He could still play 150 games and be a DH. Like a couple games, So there's ways to still give him time off from the outfield. There's no problem. Like, listen, you tell me Tyrone Taylor's playing left field defensively, I'm okay with that.
Yeah, absolutely. I think the DH is a weapon. They're not locked in the way they were last year with an absolute everyday DH. Jesse Winker could play the outfield. We'll get more into Starling Marte coming up in a bit. But to answer your question on what Brandon Nimmo is, I think if you look at his first half numbers last year, he had 250. He had an 800 OPS. So the average was down a little bit, but the OPS was where it always is, right around 800. And he hit for a lot of power. He had 16 home runs in the first half of last year. And then he fell off the freaking mountaintop. And I'm going to assume that that's not Brandon Nimmo, that horrible second half doesn't indicate what he now is. And then you look at the 2 previous years, he had exactly 274 in both years. He hit 16 home runs and then 24 home runs the following year, both with years above 800 OPSs. So I'm going to answer it by saying that's who he is, that he's probably 265, 800 OPS, 22 home runs. Now, that may not be good enough for you, but to answer your question in a fair way, in which I'm not saying he's going to have a career season, I also don't think he's fallen off the rooftop. I think the last 3 years outside of last year's second half tells you that those numbers I just said, that's probably what he is.
Okay, no, that's fair, and I accept that. But if he's going to have a nagging injury all season long, and last year maybe that's the reason why his season kind of fell to the wayside the second half, is this something that's going to affect those numbers all season long? I am concerned about that.
I hope not. I mean, if he's hitting 150 in the second, 150 this year like he did in the second half, that's a big ass problem. But I think that I don't have any reason to believe that's going to happen. But I do think that the Mets are going to have to be more careful with him. As much as I think the term these days is posts. That's the term everyone likes to use. This guy posts every day. As much as Lindor posts and Alonso posts and Nimmo has posted over the last 3 years, I think Nimmo, more so than those other two guys, he's going to need to not post every single day. There are going to need to be days for him. And the Mets are equipped with outfield depth, with options where it's not the worst thing in the world. You know, it's not like you're going that far down if you have to give Nimmo a day. But, yeah, he already dealing with knee issues, so fingers crossed that he'll get through this and he'll start to play in more games in spring training and be fine.
And you said this too, like he typically starts later in spring training because he wants to play as many games as possible. So the fact that he came in early knowing that there's an issue, to me, it's just a weird optic that why wouldn't he just take more time off?
His answer was because he figured something like this could happen where there's some soreness. So let's get it out of the way early. That was his answer.
All right. I trust him.
Let us go to Rico story number 3. And that's the fact that they still may trade Starling Marte. Pat Ragazzo had a report the other day that the Kansas City Royals are still interested. The Mets are still interested in moving him. And I do have a fear because I want to keep Marte. I've made that very clear on the Rico. I think that this part-time DH role is actually good for him. And I think the Mets will be able to get a lot out of him. They're not asking him to play the field. They're not asking him to play every day. I think he can be productive like he was at times last year, especially in the postseason. But I'm starting to fear that they are going to trade him. That they are looking around, and I don't know what kind of reliever they can get back from Kansas City, if that's what it is. We floated the idea of Jordan Montgomery. Not sure how realistic that is. I don't know what the return is. It's probably not going to be anything that we're going to be pumped up about. I don't like the idea of giving him away. I get he's overpaid. No one's arguing he's overpaid. And Alexander Canario certainly has a lot of potential. By the way, I don't know how I came across this because I didn't remember it at all. But I saw a highlight from a Met Cub game from this past season. And it was Alexander Canario in right field making this incredible leaping catch, which I do not remember. I'll be the first to tell you. But he made this awesome catch in right field. Do you remember that at all?
No, but I'm assuming that's where David Stearns first found Alexander Canario.
Oh, he's better than that. Come on, he's been scouting him for years. I don't know how I got there. Like, I don't know why I ended up watching a highlight of Canario making this great leaping catch against the Mets at Citi Field, but he did. I'm fearful of this. And I say the word fearful because, look, I'm on record. I'll say it again. I wouldn't trade Starling Marte. If I can get something back where I think it makes the team better, it's a different conversation. So I guess in fairness, tell me the player they're getting back, and then I can say, oh, I'm good with that. I don't think they're going to get a player back that's going to make me say, oh, I'm good with it. So to me, I'm fearful of it. Keep an eye on it. But it's still out there that Starling Marte, who's closer to playing in games, Mendy said the other day he's closer to playing in games, that he may be traded before the start of the year. And I think that would just lead to a Canario Winker designated hitter platoon. Or because Canario is a hell of an outfielder, maybe more Brandon Nimmo DHing, as we just talked about. That could absolutely be an option. That it's a Canario Winker platoon, but when Canario plays, he's in left field and Brandon Nimmo DHs. We shall see. Let's get to story number 2. And that's the fact that we now have updated prospect rankings for the New York Mets. So if you go to MLB.com right now, our number 1 prospect is Brandon freaking Sproat, who we're excited about. And like I said earlier on the Rico, as soon as he's ready, as soon as the Mets look at him after he failed at AAA in a brief period of time last year, as soon as they say, all right, he's ready to go, call this guy up. Because the Mets have shown you, and I'm not saying they're wrong, it could work out real well. They don't want to give big-time money to free agent starting pitchers, so why not develop them? And Brandon Sproat is the number 1 prospect in the Met organization, and he's close. Number 2 is Jet Williams, who's coming off a real lost year last year. I think we would have assumed that, coming into last year when we were doing a Rico Brogna, we would have figured, hey, Jet Williams will be up here in 2025. Unfortunately, he had the wrist injury. He missed a lot of time. He wasn't great, but hopefully Jet Williams will sort of skyrocket a little bit. I don't think he'll be on the team at any point this year, but I wouldn't rule it out. The third biggest prospect is the kid that they drafted last year, Carson Benj, the outfielder. He's years away, but good to see we got a new prospect in the system. Ryan Clifford is number 4. Ryan Clifford is about to have a big year. And I don't mean a big year in terms of he's going to hit 35 home runs, though I'd love to see it. I mean in terms of there are a lot of factors that I think are going to determine how aggressive the Mets are in keeping Pete Alonso or signing Vladimir Guerrero Jr. for those that want him. Ryan Clifford's ascension as a 21-year-old prospect, now the 4th biggest prospect in the farm system, will play a big role in that. Nolan McLean is number 5, another starting pitcher. Remember, Nolan McLean was the two-way player, but he's given up the second way. He's now just a pitcher. Speaking of pitchers, Jonah Tong, who is probably a year and a half away, but another one of those young arms. He's the 6th biggest prospect. And then you've got Luis Angel Acuna. But the other takeaway I have was the drop of Drew Gilbert. Drew Gilbert is now the 11th biggest prospect for the New York Mets. Now, granted, they added a few guys like Ilian Pena, the 17-year-old, but Drew Gilbert had a real lost year. And there are some indications here early on that you would be a little bit concerned about what the Mets think of him. He had a hamstring issue last year, missed a lot of time. He goes to the Arizona Fall League, plays, and now the Mets are taking their sweet-ass time, in which Mendy was asked, hey, do you think he's going to be ready for opening day for the minor league season? And he said yes, but yet they're not really doing much with him. So Drew Gilbert is a name we've talked a lot about, a guy we've mentioned as, hey, he plays well. He could be the center fielder, and Tyrone Taylor and Jose Siri could become bench pieces. While that could still happen, Gilbert's stock has clearly dropped. Now let us get to the number one story.
Oh, before we do that.
Yes.
Before we do that, I did just do a little quick search on the Canario catches.
Yes.
It seemed like he played all of all of April with the Cubs. He played left field and right field, and he did rob JD Martinez of a hit in right field. That was on April 30th. Prior to that, he made a pretty ridiculous catch versus Jesus Sanchez versus the Marlins, and then also made a nice catch. There was like 3 highlights that came up instantly with Canario in the outfield. The problem with him, he doesn't look very smooth. He can make the play, but he looks a little awkward out there in the outfield. It's not I've seen much. I mean, when you look at Harrison Bader play outfield, you see someone that's just smooth, and even Tyrone Taylor makes some plays look a little more difficult at times. Canario looks like a step underneath both of those guys. So that's just my quick assumption.
In fairness, got to watch him a lot more to make a fair determination, but he's probably better defensively than Starling Marte at this point, who I don't know if he will ever see the field for the Mets in 2025. Even if they don't trade him, I don't know if he'll ever see the field. So from that standpoint, he's better defensively than Starling Marte, and that's who he would essentially be replacing if he makes the team. Remember the situation with Canario. He's out of options. So either he's on this team, and he's on this team because either an outfielder's on the IL or they traded Starling Marte, or he goes through waivers. And I would think someone will pick him up. He's 24 years old. He played reasonably well. You mentioned he played for Chicago in April and May. He didn't play a lot, but he hit 280. So I don't know. I think that if I had to guess right now, and I've evolved on this just based on watching, hearing, listening, I think they're going to trade Marte. I do. I think he's going to be one of those deals made right before opening day. Now, let's get to the number one story. The Rico won. And that is the fact that Jose Iglesias signed with the San Diego Padres. A minor league deal with the San Diego Padres, I must say. So a couple of thoughts went through my head. Number one, there is a sadness because Iglesias and his vibe and the music and the performance was a real huge part of last year. And last year, 2024, I think will always be a special year in Met history. It's not as special as 86 or 69, even as special as 15 or 2000 or 73, years where they got to the World Series. But it was a very unique year. It featured a lot of amazing moments, and I think it may have shocked us more than any other year. Of course, outside of 1969, I wasn't around for it, but they are the Miracle Mets. I have to respect that. But in my lifetime, last year may have been the most shocking. And a part of the shock was Jose Iglesias. So I want to, before we get deep into this, I do want to say thank you as a Met fan. He was great. He was a joy to watch. The song was catchy. The concert that night was awesome. I was lucky to be in the ballpark that night with my oldest son, Jet. So Iglesias was a wonderful Met. And I think we will always have fond memories of what he did for the team and his role with the team. Okay? So let's get that out of the way. With that said, from a baseball standpoint, I understand why the Mets are moving on from him. Now, we have broken this down ad nauseum, but there is no room on this roster for Iglesias and a Brett Beatty or a Luis Angel Acuna. Now, I'll be the first to tell you, if the New York Mets break camp with Donovan Walton or Luis de los Santos as the backup infielder, as the 26th man on the roster, I'm going to be annoyed. And I'm not going to just be annoyed because Iglesias is a better option, which he clearly would be. I'd be annoyed because I don't think the Mets would be doing what puts them in the best kind of area for success, which is that last guy on the roster, to me, should be a guy who has a chance to make an impact. Donovan Walton has no chance to make an impact. Let's not waste our time with this. Luis de los Santos does not have a chance to make an impact unless, look, it's baseball, right? Crazy things happen. It is unlikely they're going to make an impact. It's likelier than not that Donovan Walton will live in history the way Zach Short and Bradley Emis does. You know what I mean? So all the arguments I'll make on why it made sense to let Iglesias go kind of goes out the window if one of those two guys, 26 man on the roster. But if it's Brett Beatty, who it should be, or it's Luis Angel Acuna, I get it. Let me start with Beatty because I'm endorsing Beatty. I think Beatty should make the team. I think we have reached a moment with Beatty, despite playing 175 games at the major league level, where it is crap or get off the pot time. He failed last year at third base. Vientos got the job. We all get it. But this year, he has a chance to not only be a guy who plays second base when McNeil doesn't, or a guy who plays second base when McNeil's in the outfield, or a guy who DHs, or a guy who plays third base when Vientos DHs, or third base when Vientos plays first base. He's going to have a chance to play. This is a chance to hit. And he's got a much bigger upside offensively than Jose Iglesias does. He has a bigger upside than him. He does. Brett Beatty could be the Mark Vientos of 2025. I know that people out there don't believe that's going to happen. You don't have to believe it. You have to admit it could happen. He's a former top prospect for a reason. I want Beatty on this team because I want to find out. I don't want Beatty on this team because I'm guaranteeing he's going to be awesome. I would just be making that up. I'd be talking out of my rear end. I'm saying it because I want to see it. This is his last shot. He has conquered AAA. I've seen enough. Go hit at the major league level. Brett Beatty offers a larger upside than Jose Iglesias. And as far as, well, what about the backup shortstop? Okay, for a 16-2 game, McNeil goes over there, Beatty goes over there, whatever. Lindor gets hurt, somebody finishes the game. The next day, of course, you call up a shortstop. That's how you handle that. It's not that complicated. And I think the Mets are willing to do it. Mendy seemed willing, when I asked him at point blank, to be willing to do that. Brett Beatty would not be on the roster with Jose Iglesias. Let's get that clear, the way the roster is constructed. Wouldn't happen. Same with Acuna. Now, there are a lot of people out there that are higher on Acuna than they are Beatty, and I totally get why. Acuna played well for 2 weeks. He did. He didn't play well at AAA, but you don't care because you didn't watch it. But at the major league level, when Lindor got hurt, he came up, he played incredibly well. And if you want Acuna on the team, I get it. Now, I think he's going to have to hit in spring training, which he hasn't done so far. But if he can do that, he offers speed, he offers versatility, the ability to play shortstop. I'm not anti-Acuna, and I'd agree that Acuna also offers a bigger upside than Jose Iglesias. Those other two guys I mentioned don't. And that's why they let Iglesias go, because they have other options. Ronnie Mauricio, we didn't even mention. I think he needs to just play consistently for a while, and then he could be up here. And by the way, you don't think Ronnie Mauricio has a bigger upside than Jose Iglesias? Also a guy that can play shortstop, third base, and second base. So this comes down to the fact that the Mets have a lot of middle infield options, all of which have higher upsides than a guy who had a career year last year. Sure, he could hit 280. Not saying he can't, but he's 35 years old. As far as the vibe is concerned, I'm going to take a leap of faith that you can't rely on the same vibe from last year this year. You can't. 2024 was unique and was special in its own way, and you cannot replicate that. As far as Iglesias from the beginning of this season, beginning of this offseason, I laid this out. It didn't happen, so I admit the next 2 minutes are going to be a waste of time, but I want to be honest about this. I looked at McNeil, and I said, if I can trade him, I'd like to trade Jeff McNeil. I made that very clear at the beginning of this offseason. And I thought if they did that, Iglesias could have been the bridge starting second baseman until all of those guys I just mentioned, whether it's Beatty, whether it's Acuna, whether it's Mauricio, even Jet Williams himself, until one of them took the job. And that would have been ideal. The reason it didn't happen, in my opinion, is McNeil didn't have any value. And I was not a fan of just dumping Jeff McNeil. So one guy who listens to this pod all the time, listens to Evan and Tiki as well, is Dan. We called him Negative Dan. I don't want to call Negative Dan anymore. So we'll just call him Loyal Dan. Because Dan is a very loyal listener to not only this podcast, but Evan and Tiki. And what he does very well is he'll find old tweets that I had or Sean had or Tiki had or Tommy had. But he also sent me something today in which he wanted to hold me accountable. And he supplied me with a transcript from a Rico Brogna from, I think it was late last year, in which I said, hey, guys, we need to make a promise. And that promise is, I'm paraphrasing this, no matter how hot Jeff McNeil gets, don't fall back in love. As soon as his value is up, trade him. I stand by that. I accepted that he didn't have a lot of value. I accepted that he's here. I've accepted that I didn't want to get rid of him for nothing because I thought that was bad business. But I'm not telling you, hey, if Jeff McNeil gets off to a great start, I could never trade him. In the right deal, I would trade him. Probably during the offseason more than the middle of a season in which you're competing. But I haven't changed off of that. It just didn't work this offseason. It didn't. And if it did, and they were able to trade him for a back of the rotation arm or a bullpen arm or a middle of the rotation arm or whoever you want to come up with where we deemed it, hey, that's a good deal, then I think Iglesias would have made more sense coming back. But the way things are set up right now, it did not. As far as the minor league deal is concerned, well, what about the minor league deal? If you sign him to a minor league deal, and of course it offers no risk, it's why it's so appealing. What was going to change between now and opening day, barring injury, that was going to change any of what we just said about why he shouldn't be on the team? Why Beatty offers a higher upside? You're forcing yourself to have to release a player who is wildly popular with the team. So I'm saddened because Iglesias was a wonderful Met, but I understand it. And that is our final story on the Rico 10. I do want to remind everybody on Saturday, we will be live from Jupiter, Florida. We will be doing a live Rico from Das Bar. It's a beer garden. Apparently, it's very nice. It'll be my first time there. And we're going to be doing a live Rico. So stop by at about 4:45 if you're in Florida. If not, you can consume the Rico Brogna via YouTube or wherever you download your podcast. And again, if you have a few minutes, you could fill out the Rico survey. There is a survey. It's here on the YouTube channel, or it's where you download the podcast. And by filling it out, you have a chance to get 50% off the brand new Rico t-shirt. We do appreciate you listening. We do appreciate you hanging out. And for those that will be in Florida, we will see you Saturday at Das Beer Garden, March 8th, 4:45 to 6 p.m. Thank you very much for listening to Rico Brogna.
We hope you enjoyed this episode of the Rico Brogna podcast. It's amazing, isn't it? Make sure you download it now to keep it on you at all times.